Bruce Springsteen's Born to Run is an ode to escape, platformed by the incessant thrum of engines. But is it his best album? Let's get into it, shall we? The incessant murmur of engines amid this little slice of Americana, all bikes and greasy overalls. It's a world where the protagonists seem to be tied up in each other and the hopelessness of their lives. It's like a play by Tennessee Williams, set to the thrum of guitars and horns. You get Clarence Clemens' triumphant yet bittersweet saxophone wailings and Roy Bittan's niggly piano motifs augmenting this the muscular Telecaster guitar sound that provides the platform for these blue-collar tales of spit and struggle.
Music is evocative, It's meant to evoke emotions and personal responses in the listener.
Meeting Across the River is a Lou Reed-inspired number, and Thunder Road is cinematic in its scope, with its employment of some pretty devastating imagery. Skeleton frames of burnt-out Chevrolets. As a listener, you feel mesmerised by the gleam of chrome as this album takes us delves deep into a well of Americana, a world of bikes and anti-heroes shaped by the churn of rock and roll. It's a bit of a murky soup sonically, as far as I'm concerned, enshrouding these hard luck stories. In 2003, this album was actually included as part of the National Recording Registry, so obviously it's perhaps an album of some note. But it's an album that also has, and we forget this, but it's an album that also has hope and optimism at its very core as well. The possibility of escape, the possibility of there being some sort of salvation, if you will, to couch it in religious terminology. With Darkness on the Edge of Town, we feel like the door is slammed shut on these people's lives. And The River, of course, is a wonderful album that explores all our human interconnections. It's a big, sprawling, meandering piece, very much like the river itself. So this album is about escape in many respects. I mean, you could argue that protagonists' lives that they escape from are no better than the lives they end up running to, as Darkness on the Edge of Town will testify. And this album then starts to emerge as a kind of urban allegory of the irrepressible nature of the human spirit. It incorporates characters that call for a kind of a blue-collar emancipation, a clarion call for the moral idea that Springsteen wishes to impart. Best summed up in the words of the great philosopher Lemmy Kilmister, "Don't let the bastards grind you down." And Springsteen uses everyman figures on this album. He doesn't subscribe to using heroic archetypes in any way. There's a real battle that takes place in the hearts and minds of the tenement buildings and factory floors. I mentioned Tennessee Williams earlier, but people like Tennessee Williams would have perhaps enjoyed the expression of the heroic through the everyday lives and aspirations of working people. And I think Springsteen is very true to that spirit. And let's not forget this album is quite cinematic. It's almost film noir in its exploration of light and darkness. It casts quite a grey shadow across the whole album. Many argue this is kind of the birth of Springsteen. I think it's wrong to dismiss those excellent earlier albums, but this one, he seems to be doing something different, or there's an increasing sense of ambition here. He starts to use what I call the blue-collar protagonist that becomes a defining motif for him, and this album seems to sweat and struggle within the confines of a long summer night. It's a series of little vignettes of people's lives, all seem to be occurring at exactly the same moment. It's a bit like Hitchcock's Rear Window, where you get glimpses into people's lives that are all exploding at the same time. We as listeners are cast in the role of Jimmy Stewart, become voyeurs to the tragedy. And that working class archetype is very much akin to films like On the Waterfront, starring Marlon Brando and Rod Steiger, of course, wonderful film. Springsteen said he wanted to play around with the paradigms of rock and roll. He wanted an album that was not simply rooted in New Jersey. He wanted an album that had a more universal appeal. And I think he achieves that. Many of us recognise in this struggle something of our own lives. They started recording this album in 1974, and Springsteen is famed for his obsessive perfectionism. In fact, there was an ungodly amount of time spent re-recording sax solos and other parts. This album, I think, represents a maturing of Springsteen as a singer and songwriter as well. In fact, I think he said, I left behind my adolescent definitions of love and freedom. And you could arguably say that this album is the dividing line between those earlier records and the point where he looks in more depth at the complex issues that surround his characters' lives. Apparently it took about 6 months to record Born to Run, as Springsteen was consistently unhappy with the end result. But I think the turning point was when they brought in producer John Landau. Now John Landau was far more aggressive in getting what he needed from the musicians in order to get the end result that Springsteen was looking for. And what Springsteen wanted is he wanted the album to... I wanted Born to Run to sound like Roy Orbison singing Bob Dylan, but produced by Phil Spector. This album has been described as a quest narrative, not that I'm suggesting we should wander into the murky territory that is the concept album, but certainly tracks like Thunder Road and Born to Run are, in the words of Springsteen, uplifting odes to escape. But there is also space on this album for tracks like Backstreets and Jungle Land, with these epic tales of loss and betrayal. I think at one point he actually wanted to start the album with Thunder Road and end the album with Thunder Road, but obviously sort of veered away from that. I mentioned John Landau earlier. I mean, he was very instrumental in shaping this album, I think. In fact, he was the one that decided that they move from 914 Studio to the Record Plant Studio. He's also famous as saying, "I've seen the future of rock and roll, and it's Springsteen." And the cover of this album is part of its identity as well. It's iconic. It's been parodied by so many people. It was a series of about 900 frames, photographs taken by photographer Eric Miola, with Springsteen and Clarence Clemens on the front cover, which embodies this idea of friendship, I think, which is another theme of the album. The songs on this album are like mini epics. Springsteen said he wanted to strip them of rock and roll cliche and just explore what was real. But we think about the songs on this album. Thunder Road was originally going to be called Wings for Wheels. Early rewrites of this song included changing names and even changing some of the lines of the song so it wasn't so bleak. In fact, you take the line from the song Skeletons, Frames of Burned Out Chevrolets. It was originally skeletons found by exhumed shallow graves. And the mournful wail of the harmonica very much sets the tone for this one. It's certainly a song that's rooted in the very notion of teenage rebellion, one that just becomes analogous. The journey becomes analogous with freedom. 10th Avenue Freeze Out is really just an uplifting ditty about the formation of the E Street Band. And the character Bad Scooter, of course, and this is actually Springsteen himself. But The Night is more interesting, much heavier number. Its tone, of course, is much heavier. About a blue-collar worker who looks forward to escaping his life in order to go out drag racing or racing at night. Again, it's another song that seems to be very much about the need to escape or to get away from the monotonous drudgery of blue-collar work. The Night communicates as something almost subversive, almost shrouding, where the protagonist is imprisoned by his dreams. Rolling Stone has said of this album that it contains music so stately and so heartbreaking that it might be the prelude to a rock and roll version of the Iliad. And we think of Backstreet. I mean, it starts off with an organ sound that's very reminiscent of Dylan's Positively 4th Street or that Blonde on Blonde sound that he had. And that opening line, "One soft infested summer," tells a story of friendship. It's very Jack Kerouac, I think. Again, we feel the need to escape a life that is essentially suffocating. The quote from the song, "Trying in vain to breathe the fire we was born in, catching rides to the outskirts, tying faith between our teeth." These dramatic lyrics embodying the cinematic scope of this record. Later on he sings, I love the line, "Just another tramp of hearts, crying tears of faithlessness." I could hear the whole damn city crying, I think at one point he says. It's something you'd imagine Robert Mitchum saying in one of those old film noirs. Born to Run, that anthemic number, of course, with Wendy, the love interest, who Springsteen seems to express certainly not a lot of love for, but certainly not a lot of patience for. Apparently with this one he wanted to experiment with the sounds of engines and motorbikes, but just found that the production, the wall of sound, incessant blurb of splodge of sound, if you like, found there wasn't a lot of room for that sort of thing, or just got lost in the mix. As I said, the mix of this album makes it all sound very busy, congested, perhaps is the better word since we're talking about traffic and escape. I love the first line of this number, "We sweat it out on the streets where runaway American dream." I think the reference to the American Dream here is rather caustic and sarcastic. Certainly in the sort of vein that Arthur Miller's Death of a Salesman might have uttered a line like that. And certainly the verb to sweat suggests hardship and toil. It's what the value of that hardship and toil has, though, that's the real question. He rhapsodizes about automobiles on this album, which becomes a very potent symbol of freedom. On here, the need to escape. She's the One is one of the highlights on this album for me. It's about having or labouring under the burden of this idealised image you might have of somebody. And the staccato beat on this is very Bo Diddley. Meeting across the river, originally going to be called The Heist, about two protagonists, one of them named Eddie, who are looking to deal with a shady character across the river. And Jungle Land, of course. I mean, who doesn't get chills when they hear the bridge section of this number? Famously, Springsteen made Clarence Clemens work for 16 hours to get the saxophone just right on this one. The character Rat tries meeting up with his barefoot girl who takes a stab at romance before disappearing down Flamingo Lane. The sheer poeticism of the lyrics, I think Springsteen was still trying to be Bob Dylan at this point. It's like the Odyssey, but set in 1950s America. It certainly has a West Side Story feel to it. A barefoot girl sitting on the hood of a Dodge drinking warm beer, the soft summer rain. And I love the simile, I think it's in the second verse, about the kids looking like shadows. It's very much a symbolic representation of the lives these people lead, from churches to the jail. It feels like a rhapsody in neon, a very urban-rooted number, there's no doubt about that, like most of the songs on this album, in fact. This is a wonderful record, in my opinion. I thoroughly enjoy listening to it, despite my misgivings about that Phil Spector wall of sound vibe he was going for. But I'd love to know what your opinion of this album is. I really would. Please leave your comments down below. I know I'd like to thank you so much for watching this video. If you haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, and do check that notification bell. And other than that, just hope you're staying well, safe, and more importantly that you keep listening.